Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Richard Porter. He's a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. Richard, good to have you back on.
Good to be here, Tom. Thanks.
So I wanted to have you on. You've obviously been a lawyer for a number of decades, and there was this story in the Federalist, which was this exclusive. They got their hands on this memo that was written by Judge Boasberg, one of these guys, a judge who's a district court judge who's been in the news a lot because he's issued a number of injunctions against the president and his executive orders. And this memo that the Federalist got their hands on said that during the annual meeting that these judges have, right, is Chief Justice John Roberts and the chief judge of all the different districts and some of the regional courts. They meet in D.C. This was during the week of March 11th of this year, so just not too long ago, that he had written a memo and they had discussions about Donald Trump and his concern that, this is Judge Boasberg talking, his concern that Trump would disregard rulings of the federal courts, leading to a constitutional crisis. And so, Richard, I guess the question for you is I don't know enough about this to have a well-formed opinion. How big of a deal is this? Is this as big of a deal as the Federalist is making it out to be? How unusual is this for a district court judge to put something like that in writing, not just because he's the president of the United States, but also because he's a defendant now in many, many cases that have been brought through our judicial system. So, I mean, how much did this surprise you or shock you, and how big of a deal is it?
It's a big deal, but it's not shocking. It's a little surprising that someone wrote it up. I think actually what happened was it was a conversation that occurred that was then summarized in a memo. But what's really extraordinary about it is it's a window into the challenge that the Trump administration has dealing with 600 district judges around the country. You know, we elect one president, and there's the idea is we have one president, the unitary executive theory. The idea is that president alone has control of the executive branch. But Trump's activism, his vigor, his energy, and he's brought to office, which is in such contrast to the president that just came before him, has gotten a number of people who should know better so spun up that they are doing things that they should know is wrong. I mean, there's no way you should be discussing with a higher court a litigant in cases that are before your court at that time. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. One of the basic principles that even I know as a corporate lawyer is that you don't have ex parte conversations about a case. So trying to
learn that like the first day in law school, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you're basically, you can see Boasberg, he's trying to prepare the justices with his perspective. He's almost doing a little oral argument himself over this breakfast about the bad behavior of these litigants in front of him. One of them, he's basically saying they're going to violate the law. When the reality is that these judges themselves are violating the law, not just in terms of talking to the higher court about this, but in the way they're approaching the job. We have branches we always talk about as separate but equal, and nowhere does it say the branches are actually equal, but it's clear that they're separate. And the Constitution purposefully divides power among the branches. The executive has the power to execute on the laws, and it's the judge's role not to be superior to that. They're not the ultimate executive. We don't have judicial supremacy. They are equal to, or actually in the Federalist Papers, they talk about them as being the weakest of the three branches, being legislative, executive, and judicial. It's their job to reason about the law and persuade about what the right answer is. But their power over the executive is relatively limited because, again, they are on a par. So the power they ultimately have is with reason. And we are respectful of each other's power. And the president, although he's not happy about it, has been respectful even of judges that have gone too far. And so there's no case in which, Boasberg should have been talking about this. But on top of that, his fear was unfounded. It turns out he was the one that was acting extra legally, not Trump. So it's really sort of an interesting window into the complex way people are thinking about this thing, because people are doing things they really shouldn't be doing.
And part of the reason, Richard, and this is sort of the larger discussion when you step back and look at this, is the politicization of the judiciary, right? And we have seen that over time. I mean, I've been doing this 25 years. You've been, in this longer than I have. in terms of watching the court and Congress and how important everyone talked about the judicial appointments being. But it seems like judges aren't necessarily leaning liberal or leaning conservative. They're almost more, part of the blue team, part of the red team. And certainly with Trump involved, there has been this almost urge among partisans, including now folks who are embedded in the judiciary, to resist whatever it is he does. So, how do we undo that? How do we depoliticize the judiciary? Is that even possible at this point? Or
Well,
is this just
it's
an
hard. Yeah.
ongoing process that I don't even know where it ends, but probably ultimately in some sort of constitutional crisis? But is there any way to unwind this system that we've got going?
Well, recognize that the judges themselves are chosen on a political basis. So almost
Right.
all these judges are chosen because of political connections they have. So some are chosen because they're great academics. I had the opportunity to work with one of those judges. But by and large, what you find in the judiciary are smart lawyers that have political connections. And so the degree of their political activism will vary, but they're all going to have a political background, more or less. That's just part of the system. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what is important is that when a judge puts on the robes, what ideology do they adopt? The idea of the rule of law is an important ideology. The idea is that law is above all who are governing, including the judges, and that the judge's job is to put aside biases in terms of judging the case in front of him with the two parties, but also with regard to the law, to review the law dispassionately with the objective of implementing the will of the people as expressed through Congress and the executive branch. It's not necessarily to be creative. Now, the problem, I don't know where it ends, Tom, but where it starts with an ideology over the last 50 years that's taken hold in our law schools, the idea of critical legal studies. And I wrote an article about this with Real Clear Politics earlier last year. The problem is that there is this ideology on the left, which is that law is always inherently political, and that therefore the judge should don the political interests that they have and be self-justified in the exercise of their political will. It argues for the politicization of the judiciary. So when you have judges from the two parties, a lot of the judges coming in from the left have an ideology that politics is good in law. On the right, there's still a conservative view, which is that the rule of law is something independent of a partisan viewpoint, and the objective is to be outside of yourself, outside of your own will, and instead adopt the will of the people as expressed in the law. So you have a rule of law ideology on the right, which Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts, these other folks that on the Supreme Court majority still wholly adopts and is trying to still promulgate. And on the left, you have people who are more self-consciously adopting political viewpoints because that's the ideology that they learned in law school. The ultimate answer, I think, is we have to get back to the rule of law, where judges believe in law too, and judges recognize that they have a very limited and very humble role in this process. And that's just to be honest about what the law actually says.
You kind of almost led me to my next question, which was on the Supreme Court in the case of Ketanji Brown Jackson. She has now found
Possibly
her.
Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, she's now found herself on, dissenting in 7-2 cases, 8-1 cases. And she actually gave an interview the other day where she said she was proud of the fact that she had this platform to espouse her opinions. And she is written in a couple of these dissents, arguing almost outside of the law, irrespective of precedent, and just sort of arguing her political opinion, and even to the point where, again, Sotomayor, for example, who's a progressive judge and certainly someone on the left, has I wouldn't say rebuked her, but sort of tried to friendly remind her that some of her arguments are just not quite out of bounds, but certainly off the mark. So we now have this at the Supreme Court, and so again, it's like I don't know how we deal with this and where this ends up leading us. But when Trump is off the scene, when he's gone, is there going to be a reversion to will some of this stuff subside, or is this the new normal? And it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or JD Vance or Marco Rubio or any Republican from this point forward, that this is where we're headed.
What Trump is really good at, he's good at getting people to reveal who they really are. And I think that that's what we see with Justice Ketanji Brown. Because once you reject the rule of law as an ideology, and your viewpoint is that being a judge creates a platform for you to express your opinions, what you've done is you've moved away from a situation where there's a dispassionate review of what the law is, and instead the judge is saying, I am the manifestation of the law. I am the law. Just the way Fauci said, I am science. You have Ketanji Brown saying, I am law. And that this has a kind of idea of judicial supremacy, of rule by judges. Now, some cultures, like in Iran, they have mullahs, which are essentially judges announcing the law. And this is a completely different, to shift away from the neutral ideology that the country was founded upon. So what's happening is that this Trump's activism is getting judges to reveal who they really are. And it's really up to the people to recognize that that is a bad system. We're turning power over to unelected judges to declare and use their judgeship as a platform to declare what law is, instead of working through a representative process to determine what the law is going to be. The end result is that people have to choose the best people to govern them. And the people who govern them have to have a perspective on the country and on their opponents that is still part of the American tradition, which believes in the rule of law, believes in the role of the representative government. And everybody should be humble in that process and play in their own lane. And I think that's something that, unfortunately, Trump, with his bold activism, is causing some people to show just how many people in the system on the left view their role as being somewhat dictatorial in nature themselves.
We're already over time, but two quick questions. So
Yeah.
so does this mean we should think about and consider term limits, or should judges have to face election?
No, I think the election of judges, information about the judges is very difficult to obtain. I think it's better to leave it with the current system. I don't think we ought to change the con, but I just think in terms of the people we elect, the representatives, the senators, the president, they have to believe in America. They have to believe in the rule of law. And this is the problem we have. There's a lot of nonsense about democracy is at risk. And the people that are saying that are threatening democracy themselves. That's what's really profound about this. And you can see it in that memo.